when you come across a problem, which is pretty much every day, you're able to use those kind of skill sets and that kind of thinking power to really get around different problems. And I think that, if you really look at some of the big players and, some of the major CEOs, if you look at their interviews, that's kind of what they have. And that's what's really, I feel valuable.
That was Amit Shah from the AITsolution.com, 20-year-old entrepreneur joining us here on the Dumb Teacher Podcast. My name is Kenneth Allen Morris. Thank you for joining me on the Dumb Teacher Podcast. You may hear some background noise, but I just am going to go with it. I hope it's not too bad. I have the ATR 2100, the Audio-Technica mic. It seems to do a pretty good job of just picking up my voice. Amit, it's kind of mind-blowing. The kid, he started his own kind of computer repair business when he was 16, I think, company. He's in New York. Then he built it to something a little bit different. He's now going to school at Pace University in New York in, business marketing administration, and he already is the CEO of if it's not there yet, it's becoming a multi-million-dollar business from what I can tell. I didn't ask him numbers, and maybe I'll get those from him some other time. But I hope you enjoy this. A lot of little golden nuggets here from a very young entrepreneur. Hope you enjoy. Thanks. Hello.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine. How you doing?
Perfect. How are you doing today? I'm doing good.
Pretty good.
All right, that's good to hear. Sorry about that.
Nah, that's no problem. And just so I want to make sure I pronounce your name right, is it Amit Shah?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep, that's good spelling.
Excellent.
Yep.
So, yeah, I've been reading up on you, and I forget how I found you. I don't know if I found you through Facebook. I'm guessing that's how I find a lot of people.
Yeah.
But you have a really pretty awesome story. I think it's an awesome story. So
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I guess I'd like to get right into it, but maybe I'd like to probably just small talk a little bit. What's the weather like where you are right now in New York?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's actually surprisingly not that bad today. It's been pretty cold like last couple of days, especially Thanksgiving. But today it was like 60 degrees actually, so it was really surprising.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
For winter. Did you get hit by any of the large amount of snow like Buffalo? Or are you in a total
Yeah,
different
no, no,
area?
no. Yeah, I mean, like Buffalo is definitely more upstate. They got a lot more snow than we did. We got a little snow. We got maybe like 4 or 5 inches, but nowhere near to what Buffalo got.
Yeah, they had like 4 feet or
Yeah.
something ridiculous.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was insane. Yeah.
Where in New York are you? Are you like New York City?
Yeah, I'm in New York City. Exactly. Yep.
I've been there once, but it was a connecting flight, so it was like
Oh, okay.
in and out.
Yeah.
I didn't see a thing.
Yeah, yeah. Where are you from?
I'm in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Oh, nice. Okay, awesome. That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's geez, it is. Well, you probably know it's the smallest town with an NFL team.
Yeah.
The town itself is 100,000 people, so it's
Right. Wow, that's crazy. That's insane.
it is, and people come from New York
Right.
expecting something,
Yeah.
expecting a city,
Have that
and
expectation.
yeah, and there's not
fun.
there's yeah, it's pretty flat. There aren't many buildings, and downtown has a handful of bars, and
Right.
it's weird. So
That's
yeah,
funny.
yeah. I'd love for you to just start by, wait, did you get the questions I sent out
Yes. Yes,
a while
I
back?
did. I did.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I never remember if I sent them right after or
Yeah.
if I sent them later. So I guess
Yeah.
first start off, Amit, tell us kind of your story. And well, how old are you right now?
Yeah, I'm actually 20 right now.
You're 20 right now. When
Yeah.
when you started all this, you were like 16, 17.
Yeah, when I say I was
But
16.
I
Yeah.
mean, because you could really tell your life story, and it
Yeah.
wouldn't be all that long because
No, yeah.
you're a young guy. You're a young guy. So
Yeah.
so go ahead and tell us what led you to where you are now.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess, I'll start from like, where, I first started and like, how, I started or came up with the concept of AIT. So, when I was like really young, I was the type of kid, who, really didn't give a damn, especially about school and, call it a good thing or a bad thing. But, I really think that was the reason why, I am where I am today. And, I'm not, some big millionaire yet, but I think that, we're definitely, on the way of, we've been able to quadruple our revenue in the last year, and that's definitely been a very exciting thing to see. So, when I was really young, it was really interesting because, a lot of people always told me, if I don't do well in school, I really have to do well this year, and if I don't, all these bad, all these bad things are gonna happen. And people really just, always just saw me, not as just somebody as somebody who really hated school, or maybe somebody, I think it was just perceived very differently. I was as people just thought us at some points, I was just incapable and wasn't able to, do well in school. And the truth was that, it wasn't that I wasn't able to, it's just I chose not to do well.
Right.
And I think one of those reasons was because I really enjoy technology. I would go home, quote unquote, sick, a lot, and and that was reason, and the reason for that was because I wanted to just play with technology. I didn't really necessarily care about what it was I was learning about in school, just because I often didn't see the value of it. A lot of the skills you really need in life, are what you learn when you're younger. It's not that, for example, from in my opinion is, after seventh grade, I really don't think that there's a lot of the skills you really need. I mean, just for example, like there's I'm in college right now, right? I'm in junior year, and we're learning right, calculus. And
Right.
I see no logic behind needing to learn that. Sure, it might be a great skill to have if you're the type of person who wants to learn and learn and learn, but I really don't see how that is really needed in the life of a business person. I mean, like, you have advisors and you have people around you who are smarter than you who know those things. And even then, I really don't think they need calculus to figure these things out. So, it's like, that's just a prime example. And, that's a whole other topic itself. But I was just as somebody, who I really had my mindset as to, what I wanted to do. When I was younger, I really didn't, I had no clue about what the future was. I had no clue, what I would be here. And, I was just somebody who wanted to just tinker and play with technology. But, I think that things really changed. And, I'm really grateful. My dad used to own a hotel when I was younger. And, I used to spend a lot of time there. And, one of the things that, I really got out of that experience was, two things, right? Number one, my dad used to own a hotel. That's, a pretty cool thing.
Yeah.
And number two was, I think that I really got to learn all the different aspects of a business, right? What goes into it. Sure, the different aspects of a hotel business versus a technology company are two different things, but the basics and the principles are very same, right? So that was kind of really cool to see, as somebody who was really young, to be able to see my father run a business, and more importantly, for me to really learn the different sides of the business. So you know I would follow around the different people, right, that were in charge. So, for example, I followed around the housekeeper, the executive housekeeper, and for for a really long time. And
Yeah.
thank God, my career didn't end there. But after that, I started following around like the IT guy and the maintenance guy, and
Yes.
surprisingly, a lot of my time went towards following around the maintenance guy rather than the IT guy, which is kind of ironic. But I really was somebody, who really enjoyed learning a lot about technology and solving problems. And I think that's kind of why I really enjoyed following around those two, guys. So what happened was, there would be all these technology problems, that would always be happening. Of course, in every business that happens.
Yep.
So, it was just really interesting because, I was able to fix these problems because at home, I would just play with technology and I would just, I would do whatever. I would call tech support. I would stay on the phone with them for hours and hours and hours. And, when they got tired of me and when they would hang up, I would just I would call somebody else. I would call the same company. Again, I would call Dell again, and then I would just make sure it was a different representative. Or if it was the same rep, I would just make sure that I use a different name. And it was just really funny because generally these companies, they generally tend to help you only if you have warranty, right?
Right.
So what I did was all the computers at my dad's hotel were had warranty, right?
Yeah.
So there was a number of computers there, of course, right? So what I would do is I would just write down all the service tag numbers,
Nice.
and I would just go one by one by one, one by one by one, and that was a long list. So that definitely kept me pretty busy. So you know that's what I did, and then
So
eventually, yeah, go
you
ahead.
you that's actually pretty genius. You basically through learned about the technology, learned about those certain computers by calling tech support and getting them on the line. And
Yeah,
did you make up problems, or did you
yeah, yeah.
did you
No, no,
troubleshoot
no.
Okay.
Yeah, I made up different scenarios. Like, for example, I remember very clearly, like, this is one of the scenarios I made up. So I said, hey, listen, I'm trying to set up this, Active Directory, which is, what you set up on a server when you have, a bunch of workstations. I'm not sure
Okay.
how
Yeah.
much you know,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I know a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, right, right. Yep, exactly. So, that's what you do to when you have like, a bunch of workstations and when you're sharing resources from a server.
Yeah.
So I said, "Hey, listen, I'm trying to do this, but I'm really not able to, I'm not sure what's going wrong." I would say what I did is I had some ideas of starting points, right, from Google or like, YouTube videos or whatever, but
Right.
then, I would get lost in the process, right? So, I said, "Hey, listen, I did this, 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 and, I'm really getting lost here, so I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong, but, hey, if you can help me, that'd be really awesome." And, I said, I know I'm under warranty because, I'm with a business and, I really hope you can help. So, they
Wow.
said, hey, yeah, so this is what we have to do. So, I would go through those examples, right? And then, I would just think of, different scenarios, right? Different examples of, different things would go wrong, right? So I would ask lots of questions, and, this would go on for like a really long time. And because, at this point, I cared more about this than my actual homework. So I considered this my homework. So,
Yeah, and
uh,
you're almost getting tutored. I mean, you had
right.
like a professional tutor.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is.
That is
So,
hilarious.
yeah, yeah. So I just continued doing that, right? And long story short, that went on for a pretty long time actually. And I learned a lot actually from that. It was really surprising as to how much you can really learn just from two things, right? Making up different scenarios, and number two, and the first thing is you know starting out with a certain type of problem and asking somebody for help along the way. And it's actually pretty fun because I would even ask, like, my one of my uncles is in the IT field, so sometimes I would ask him as well. And one of my family friends friend, he's also in the IT field as well, so I used to ask him as well. So it was actually pretty funny because I would come across these problems, and I'd find a way to fix them. And then sometimes I didn't always find the solution to every problem, but it definitely gave me a great understanding of how the technology forward slash troubleshooting field works. So that helped a lot actually, and that's actually a really useful skill, especially in business, because when you come across a problem, which is pretty much every day, you
Right.
find you're able to use those kind of skill sets and that kind of thinking power to really get around different problems. And I think that that's actually a pretty big skill. And I think that if you really look at some of the big players and some of the major CEOs, if you look at their interviews, that's kind of what they have, and that's what's really I feel valuable rather than learning marketing 101 in school. So that's what I really look at, and
Right.
that's actually really useful.
Yeah, and that is what a lot of those head CEOs say and do. They hire the right people. They don't do everything. They hire the right people who have the
Exactly. Yep.
knowledge. And I mean, now I'm sure you have a really pretty good background on it, and then
Yeah.
you know who to hire. You know what to look
Right.
for in someone else.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So, that's what's really, important, I feel, in running a business, whether, you're running, a business that's doing $500,000 or you're running a business that's doing, $500 billion. But,
Right.
that's kind of, what I feel is the common thread between people who run successful companies. But, either way, right? I mean, that's one thing that I've really seen over time. So most people, generally tend to start companies after they graduate. But, what I feel, and I feel I'm really fortunate for this is that I've been able to, start a company that's doing quite well in before college, right? So that experience has definitely been much more valuable than I have seen in college. So during freshman year, sophomore year, people have been saying though, hey, by the time you get to your junior year, you'll start seeing the benefits of college. And I'm in my junior year and I'm almost done with you know,
Right.
I'm halfway done with my junior year, but I really don't see it yet. And of course, people continue to say, "Oh yeah, senior year, senior year." So I'm waiting for senior year to come around, and the day I learn something, I'll feel like I've seen a return on the crazy amount of money that my parents are spending for me on tuition.
Where are you going to school?
I actually go to Pace University in New York
Pace.
City.
Okay.
Yeah,
And what are you studying?
I study business administration
Nice.
with a concentration in entrepreneurship.
You
Hence,
know,
AI.
exactly. Yeah. And well, I imagine. I mean, with it being in your junior year now, you're probably getting into more specific courses
Yeah,
as opposed to your first and second year. So, is it a pretty powerful thing to walk into a class on entrepreneurship and be like, well, yeah, when I started my company 4 years ago, blah blah blah. What
yeah.
kind of experience do you then, you know, bring to the class?
Yeah, so what I tend to do is, like, so In the original, so when I first, when the first classes first started, I really don't tend to tell anybody, especially professors, that, I have a technology company or I have experience in the business field. I feel like, I mean, most students, tend to know just because, the word, words really travel, right? But I mean,
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I try to keep the professors and, I make them think I'm a typical student, who's just trying to get by. But, and the reason I do that is because I'm really fascinated how, they can stand up there and they can say one thing, and then, what the reality is like it's completely different. And it's just so interesting. But, when I feel like I'm gonna, my grades are starting to slip, I start bringing these things up, and, I say, oh, hey, it's a real honor to be in your class, and, I'm learning a lot, and, just all that stuff kind of stuff. So, that's when I really bring it up. But hey, as long as they don't hear this interview, I'm okay. But, in
That's so
it's
funny.
definitely very interesting. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think if I was a professor and I had to stand up there and I had to say, the things they do, I don't think I could sleep at night. I think it's easier to, oh my steal a client from a competitor, but, standing up in a classroom and, telling all these people, what they are teaching, I think that's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
I could never do that. I could not,
Yeah,
I think it's crazy.
it's it's a lot of it's theory if it's not in
Yeah, it
practice,
is. It is absolutely. So, I mean, like, hey, listen, like, to a certain point, it's useful, but, that is really, I just think that colleges are so overpriced, and, that's one of the biggest problems I have with it, right? So, I'm gonna be the kid who graduates and doesn't have to worry about a dollar in loans because my parents, just take care of the entire thing, right? But not everybody is in that position, right?
Right.
So the problem I have is that, for example, right, and this is real life example. Kids that are in the entrepreneurship program at Pace University, right? They're gonna graduate, right, with an insane amount of money in loans, right? But when they go to start their when they go to start their business, they're not going to be able to get a loan because they already have the loans, which is backlogged from school, right?
Right.
And more importantly, even if they do get their loans, right, from for starting their business or get venture capital money or whatever kind of money, friends and family, whatever it is, right? The problem is that they'll have such all this theory that, it's going to be so hard for them to, get into, a good position with their business. So, I'm not saying that, when I started my business, we started making all this money, but, sure, we went through, a cycle of failure and, messing up and all these things. But, when we started to scale and when we really started to grow, that was from the experience, that I went, learning from failure to failure. And it wasn't necessarily from, reading a textbook, So that's the main problem I have with it. And, hey, if the college tuition was, lowered by, maybe 1,000% percentage, then that'd be fine. I would have no problem with it. 'Cause, hey, at the end of the day, college is a great experience. You learn a lot by, interacting with friends, and, like, you really have a great social life, and that's kind of why I'm in school. But, that's all
Yeah.
different. But, that's kind of, what I really think of it. And I think it's just really, it's insane how much people pay for college. And, in my opinion, if you were to take that money and, invest into a business, I think that you'll be much more successful than you would in college. And, people might call me a hypocrite for saying that because I am in college and I do have a business. But I mean, I think that there's a lot that goes into it, and I don't think it's as simple as it sounds.
Yeah. There's definitely it's not a one track way, and I
Right.
think college is forced on a lot of people from
Exactly.
as early as kindergarten. What
Yeah.
do you want to be when you grow up? And
Yeah.
I mean, I did go to college, and I still have debt, and I wish I would have known differently because
Right.
I was the first one out of my family to go to college and
Yeah.
graduate, which was something I'm proud of. But
Right.
then, it's not that's not all
Yeah.
like you said. And I know that
Definitely.
some countries, I think it was I want to say
Mm-hmm.
Finland or Denmark, where they have free healthcare,
Yes.
college is paid for through
Yeah, I
throughout.
believe Australia is like that as well. I think if it's not completely free in Australia, I believe that there is a huge subsidy that the government offers, and they definitely. And I know it's not as crazy as the United States is.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
It's weird how backwards we are in a lot of
Right.
different things, like mortgages on houses too.
Right.
They're just it's just backwards. You end up paying three times what you pay for the house because you're
Right.
paying 3% or 4%
Yeah.
annually.
Definitely. I
So
mean, like, yeah, absolutely.
tell us about AIT
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I got a feel for it, and I definitely know it's evolved from. It seemed like from what I read, it started as you were kind of did computer repair and troubleshooting, and now you're moving into bigger things.
Yeah, so that's actually really impressive because most people don't realize or able to follow that because most people think of technology, okay, technology, that's that's one business, right? But people don't understand that technology is kind of like medicine, right? In medicine, you're not just
Yeah.
a doctor, you specialize in specific areas, right? So yes, your money is right on the dot with that one. But so yeah, so we first started as a company that was offering, IT services in like, small things, right? Computer repair, like, that kind of thing. So after the first year, we made a really small profit, right? We realized, okay, this is a really small business to be in, and it's going to be really hard to scale this business while being in college, right?
Yep.
Or in high school, right? So I realized, what can we start doing? What can we start offering? And what do I actually, like doing outside of this field that can make actually generate some real revenue, right? So we started doing, a bunch of different types of things. We started doing like, iOS, Android, and like, web development, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
found a really strong team, that, was really good at, development, right? So I formed a relationship with them and, I would charge my customers, right, X amount of dollars and I would
Yep.
flip that and, I would subcontract that work to a really strong team, right? And that worked very well for a really long time. And, that's kind of where I really started my business. And it's really funny because that's kind of where I really started making money, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's really fun because, most people think, oh, you have to have startup cash, you have to have all these different things to really make money, right? But it's really not about that because what happens is you have to be smart, you have to be strategic, you have to be able to, work around different problems, right?
Yep.
So I realized, right, I'm sure I can find somebody who can give me money to start this business, but why take on that kind of investment, right, when you don't know what tomorrow is going to be like, especially since you're a college student, your time is limited, right?
Right.
So what I did was I said, okay, you know what? I'm gonna find a team that is not only really good with their quality of their work and can develop and deliver work that meets my expectations, but on top of that, somebody who is willing to offer me a very competitive hourly rate, so that way we can work in quantity, right? Because I wanted to have somebody who I can add markup onto.
Right.
So we did that, right? And then after that, this was really like, last year and, the year before that. And then after that, we really started to, getting into a resource allocation. So now what we do is we hire resources and we put them on projects. So they're completely our resources. Now that we've, been able to grow, we've been able to allocate that cash towards, actual expansion and growth. So now this year, it's been, really interesting because what we do is we hire our own resources and we put them on projects. So for example, if there's a company that needs a, web technology developer or needs a, mobile app developer or, a specific type of niche technology developer, or, business guy or whatever the resource might be, right? We find the appropriate resource, right? And we provide that resource to the different types of clients that need them. And, that's been the real strategy for growth for us because the way it works is, every recruiter you hire, that you bring, right? They're kind of like sales reps, right?
Yeah.
Except, they're, full-time recruiters, right? So what we're really going to start to do this year is, bring on recruiters. And the reason why that's really beneficial is because, you set a quota for each recruiter. If they don't bring X amount of dollars in revenue, right, you get rid of them. Because they're at that point they're dead weight, right? Even if they're bringing you $300,000 in revenue, right, or whatever. I mean, that's just that's kind of low, right? So you want to really have a quota that each recruiter has to make this much, and if they can, then they can stay. If they can't, they lose a seat at the table. That's just how it works. And one of the things that I've really learned, and I think I've become really good at this, is screening people, right? So when you hire recruiters or sales reps or anybody in the marketing field, really, right? What
Mm-hmm.
you really want to look at and what you really want to see if they're good at is, if they have the fire in them. That's really what you want to look for. When people, because in marketing, one of the things that you're going to go through a lot is rejection, rejection after rejection, right?
Right.
So one thing that we really look for is, we look to see if, this candidate has been able to handle rejection and if he's been able to go through every door, right? Through the same level of enthusiasm he had from the day he knocked on door one to the day he knocked on door 1,000, right?
Right.
That's really important for us. So that's what we really look at. And the marketing people who we hire have really strong enthusiasm is the guys that end up succeeding. So that's kind of what we look for. And just it's really important to look at candidates not just at their resume or where they graduated, but what experience they have, what real world experience they have, and more importantly, what they can deliver versus
Right.
what they're saying they can.
So someone who's okay with rejection is a good example, I think, because
Yeah,
you're going to get a lot of no's with all kinds of sales.
absolutely.
Um, I was going to ask you, So do you do like software as a service?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we focus on software development. So we do, iOS, Android, Python, Ruby on Rails, Java, PHP, .NET, all the web technologies languages. And of course, the mobile languages. We have marketing resources. We have business intelligence resources. We have, big data, predictive analytics, and so on and so forth. So what we primarily do is we put our resources on projects, right? So I'm sure, different companies that do resource allocation. So what that means is, for example, if there's a client that needs a, resource that does, like let's just say, data analysis, right? For example, then what we would say is, okay, we would learn their requirements, and then after we learn the requirements of what type of resource they need, we would put one of our resources that matches that requirements on that project. So that resource now works, 40-hour weeks, or 30-hour weeks, whatever the client needs on that project.
Wow. That's really interesting. And I'm
Yeah.
kind of I'm thinking ahead of because I would probably want some quotes from you on some things on some projects because it sounds like you really know what you're doing and you really
Yeah.
like got a handle on
Yeah,
because
it's
I've
definitely very interesting. Yeah,
yeah
because one of the things what's really beneficial of resource allocation is that you know you don't have to manage the projects in-house, right? So when you don't have to manage the projects in-house, you can grow a lot quicker. You can. It's amazing how fast you can grow with the staffing model, right? So that's
yeah
what's really been beneficial for us because we can put these resources on projects, and generally it's either with the company, team directly, or it's with a small team or whatever the company size may be. But it's definitely very interesting because we work with a really wide range of types of clients. We work with startups that are well funded, to mid-sized companies, to a Fortune 500 companies, and it's just a really wide array of clients. And it's definitely very interesting to see these resources bring tremendous amount of value to the companies that they work with, and that we retain as clients. So it's definitely very interesting.
yeah. Do the teams are the teams together or can they be? Because here's my thing. If I think could be a problem is if you have like a virtual team of 5 people who are all in different areas of the world. Let's say, how do you bring a project like that together, or are you outsourcing to, um, like you said, startups or companies that have established teams that can say work on this mobile app project?
Yeah, great question. So what happens, so we've done projects like, where, there has been a team, right, that's already been established, right? And then they need an additional resource or, a couple additional resources, and that's where we come in, right? We give them those resources for the temporary project, right?
Okay.
And we've been in positions where, we've provided a resource to a company that has had like 20 different resources already on the project, and they've all been in different time zones, right? Or not all of them, but majority of them, right? And that is really interesting to see, a team like that collaborate together, because what happens is, they find a common hour where they do like, daily briefings, and they all brief each other, and the project manager gets briefed as well. But, besides that, they all work on their time, and then like, they just come in together and brief each other together on as to where they're at, and like, they, have a portal where they can collaborate and work together on the same project in the same place.
Right.
And that's really, that's primarily what happens. But typically what happens is, either if the client is like, in, wherever the client is, right? Whether it's New York City, another country, middle of nowhere,
Right.
they usually have a team that's working in the office together. And 9 times out of 10, the client wants, the resource to work in their office, and usually the other team members are in that same office as well. So, that generally makes things easy to collaborate. But again, some projects involve the resource to work completely remotely,
Right.
and that they just work on their own time, and then they collaborate with the team members remotely, and they update the project manager remotely as well, and then sometimes the team member is working half and half, right? So in the office, and then sometimes they're working remotely, the other half, right? So it depends on what the client requirements are and what the project calls for.
And I think that is becoming, first of all, it's becoming a lot less expensive to be able to do that, to collaborate.
Definitely.
I've
Yep,
been doing it.
absolutely.
I did an online program through Full Sail in there in Florida, but I had
Yep.
people all over the
Great
country who
school.
were on my team, and it was different time zones, and we had to work together, and that was part of the coolness of the projects when we had work to do is that we had to figure out how to get the work done and how to share it and how to
Yeah, absolutely.
so
Yeah. Definitely.
It's
It was really interesting because we actually just started a project where, the client is actually based in the United States, but they have an office in Beijing, and then they also have like office in like Russia, right? So it's actually
wow.
really interesting because all three teams are collaborating together. So the U.S. team, the Beijing team, and then the office and the team in Russia is collaborating together. So it's definitely very interesting to see because not only are they working together, but there's like translators involved and like there's all this
Wow.
documentation that
Yeah.
goes together. So it's definitely very cool, and it's actually really surprising how efficient they manage things to be. It's actually quite interesting because what happens is we've worked with some clients who are not so realistic here, right?
Right.
But I think that's actually really interesting. I feel like they're also a little bit more efficient than companies that are working in the United States. So it's actually really interesting to see that
Yeah.
flow.
Yeah. What platforms are you using, or do they use? Are
Yeah,
they
in regards to
proprietary, or are they like Google Hangouts, or are they Skype?
yeah, I mean like they have like every company uses like use different things. Usually the client has a specific way like they have set up through all their company through all their team members.
Yeah.
So some guys use like the software through Microsoft, and sometimes they use like Google Hangout or like Skype. Or if it's if it's more formal where like team executives are coming in, then they usually use their like Office 365 platforms. So it just depends like what the company is using. But our guys are pretty flexible, and they usually give a login credential account for whatever platform they're using to our resources, so that way they can log into whatever the system they currently have, and they don't necessarily have to shift to a whole new platform just for one resource.
Right. What do you think of all the? I did some looking up on, because you were in your area. You were named one of the top 40 entrepreneurs under
Yeah.
40, which you're way under 40. But what do you think of the ability for young entrepreneurs, to build these startups that are multi-billion-dollar companies?
Yeah, so like it's actually it's a really interesting topic because this is one that we always engage with with other developers or like other team members, or it's something that we talk about a lot, right? So it's actually okay. So this is the thing, right? Everybody grows up thinking, you have to go to school, right? You go from, first grade, second grade, third grade, and so on, right? After you do all that, you go to college. After you go to college, you find a job, right? So
Right.
it's not that, you can't do it at an earlier age. It's just that people tend to follow the system and,
Yes.
follow the system to exactly what it is like. It's not that people think, oh wow, you started a business when you were 16. It's not that 16-year-olds can't start a business. It's not that at all. It's that everybody's trained to follow the system and the way the system is. So, when people say, how did you start a business? I mean, I really didn't think of it to be a big deal because I mean, I don't want to say it was a fairly simple process, but it really wasn't like, okay, you have to go through this. It wasn't really like that. It was just about, establishing a business, and then, the same way, a successful business guy did it. It was the same way I did it. So I don't think it was really like an involved process. It's just that people think it's kind of crazy because, the majority of people don't do it, right?
Right.
And when majority of people don't tend to do it, that's when people think, oh wow, that's really interesting, right? But so I mean, I kind of I'm not saying that it's not it wasn't an easy process. It's just that people tend to follow the system a lot, and that's why it seems kind of like really like out there.
Yeah.
So I think if people start to stop following the rules and stop following the system and are willing to take risks, right? And if people can really come up with a good plan, I'm not saying that that plan's gonna work, but it's definitely a step forward than following the system and graduating and getting paid an average salary. I just don't I don't think I could do it in regards to following the system, just because I wouldn't be happy. I mean, people don't admit it, but money is wealth, and money is wealth, meaning money is power, right? So if you don't have a lot of money, you're going to be under that system and for a very long time, right?
Yeah.
So I think that people need to really understand what money can do, and a lot of people don't like to admit it. A lot of people say you can be happy without money, but it's really not true, right? I mean, one of the things that I want to do, and as somebody who hopefully one day is successful, is to be able to provide not only for my family but for my parents and my sister and everybody, right? My eventual goal is to do two things, right? Number one, buy back the hotel that my dad owned, not just for the reason money is not the reason, is to be able to hold on to the memory of where I really started. And, if I can start there, the guy next to me can also start there. And, you can reach any level in life as well, right? That's the first thing, right? And then number two is to be able to give a credit card to my parents and to my sister and just say, hey, whatever you want to spend it on this. I don't care what you spend it on, right? That's the ultimate thing. And it's somebody successful who has a lot of money can do, right? So
Yeah.
it's not that, entrepreneurs are chasing money. They're chasing two things, right? They're chasing their passion, right? And they're also chasing their desire for of succeeding. That's what really drives entrepreneurs. People keep saying, money is not something you want to chase, and that's correct. You don't want to only be chasing money, but money should definitely be part of the goal, right? It should not be the entire goal, but it should definitely be a part of it. That's what
Yeah,
people are
I
saying.
I I look at money as freedom. It
Yeah,
gives you
definitely.
gives you freedom of time, freedom of location,
Absolutely.
and scaling. Being able to scale a business, what it
Right.
sounds like you're doing, is really what creates wealth.
Absolutely.
And cash flow. You have, whether it's real estate. I'm doing some work in real estate now, and
Yeah.
it's just like, well, a hotel that's on my list too. Eventually,
Yeah.
I'd like to own a hotel too, and it's funny how well even that has changed. Being able to go and use an app to get Airbnb and get a place instead of a hotel.
Definitely, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is definitely something that that's definitely on my agenda of wanting to do. Yeah, I really feel that it's important that people really understand of what entrepreneurship is and what exactly you can accomplish by becoming an entrepreneur, right? Because a lot of people want everybody wants to become a millionaire, right, or a billionaire, right? But it's about how you go about it, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that people don't understand is that it's not that you can't become it, right? And it's not that you can't, but if you really think about it, the number of people that actually go after it or actually try to pursue it is very low, right? So people say, oh, I can't become a millionaire, I can't become a billionaire, but the question is why? Why can't you become that, right? And people really don't understand that, it's not that you can't, it's just that the number of people that actually pursue it is really low, right? That's the thing.
Right. Well, and probably because they don't think they can. You know.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And I don't. And I know there's a number in my head. I don't know what the number is, but I know that you don't have to be a millionaire or a tenfold millionaire to be successful or to be happy or to be satisfied. It's like, I mean, almost if you have cash flow, a regular cash flow, and even better yet, a passive cash flow, you're gonna be set. You're gonna be happy. You're gonna be
Yeah.
successful.
Yeah,
To me,
exactly. And I mean,
anyway.
like, it's just important. Exactly. And it's I mean, I think that, you should be able to, make a lot of money. I think that's really important just because, you want to be able to provide, for your family. And you want to be able to give an awesome life, to your kids. And you want them to be able to, not have to ever worry about money. I think that that's really important, as somebody, who would grow up and eventually have kids. I think it's really important to be able to, give that kind of life to your kids. You don't want them to be, spoiled or, not understand what they have. But I think that there's definitely, a point of, where, you should be able to put X amount of dollars in their account and in their bank account and and make sure, they never have to worry about money even after you die, and even if
Yeah.
their kids and so on. So it's really important people to understand. And, I think that that's kind of one of the downfalls, of this country. Everybody, in school, right? School, I mean, in my opinion, I think the school and the government is just, it's kind of one thing. Because if you really think about it, right, what happens is in school, they teach you how to become a wonderful employee, not even
Yes,
great. They teach you how to
I
become a
know.
wonderful employee.
Yeah.
And that's just it. It really hurts me. I mean, I really cringe, when I sit in class and, when they teach you, when they tell you, this is how you have to become a really good, interviewing and all these things, right?
Yeah.
And it's such bullshit in my opinion. It's just it's crazy because I don't want to become an employee. I don't want
Right.
to be a slave of a company. I want to do my own thing and I want to become somebody who is very successful at that. I don't want to be able to thrive and bring my ideas to another company. That's not what I'm. I don't feel that that's what my existence is for. And I think that people need to do the same thing. And I think that that's what's really going to contribute towards the greater being of humans.
Yeah, it's actually kind of ironic. I don't know if you know the history of education, but it was actually developed by, from what I understand anyway. I'm not,
Yeah, yeah,
100% right on it, I'm sure, but from what I understand, education was, well, because I think it was late 1800s, early 1900s, when child labor laws came into effect. kids needed a place to go because they couldn't work anymore. So then workers, factory companies needed people to work in those factories. So that's why there's this structure in school where you have classes that stop and start at certain times and they end at certain times, and it's roughly the same time that you'd be working at a factory.
Right.
And you sit down, you shut up and you do your work, and then when you get out, you can work in a factory and get you in the system, which is part of what you're talking about is
Right.
this system that is the rat race. I guess I call it the
Right.
rat
Yeah.
race.
No,
Or
that's exactly it. Yeah. And
so
it's just it's insane because like for example, right? Like yeah, yeah. I mean, it's crazy because it's insanity because there's one class I'm taking, right? If you're 5 minutes late, right, you can't walk into the classroom, right? I think that's insane. How
yeah,
if you're paying right $60,000 a year, and if
wow,
you walk in 2 minutes late, right? How is that? I think. I mean, listen. I think that professor. I mean, listen. I think students should have the ability of firing professors, just because if you really think about it, right, you can fire your employees. I can fire my employees, right?
right.
But how can you not fire for that professor? You're
You're
paying them.
you're
You're
paying
paying them
them.
money.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think this is it's a very interesting concept, and I think that it's really sad because people believe the system, and people especially people who come from other countries, they might be a little bit more sheltered, so they get really excited when they get a job offer at a really large company, but at the end of the day they own you, right? And that's what's really sad, and I think people really need to understand that, and that would be definitely something I would like to really focus on as an entrepreneur and really help educate the community about that, and I think that's really important people understand.
yeah. And back to the, I remember several times it came up on Shark Tank. They're talking about how much money they made from their businesses and then
Absolutely.
how they were going to handle their children. And I don't remember if it was Kevin O'Leary or if
Kevin
it was
O'Leary.
yeah
Yep.
or Mark Cuban or
Yeah.
the other guy. But they were saying how they weren't going to just hand them over an account full of money because they felt that it wouldn't it wouldn't help them
It wouldn't be
learn.
just, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yep.
So
No, and that's completely true, right? Like, for example, think about it this way, right? I mean, if somebody handed me, right, as, a 14-year-old, $50 million, $100 million, $1 billion, it would probably not be spent in the most effective way.
right.
I think that, exactly. So, I mean, at the end of the day, right, with money, you have a lot of responsibility. So I think it's like that, right? I mean, I think you can't just, hand over money, but I think that, you have to educate, the people who you hand over your money to in a very effective and wise way and not exactly by, the textbook, right? So, I mean, I think that it's important that, you keep money, set aside or, majority of your I think that it's more important that you don't tell them, especially when they're young, and you start educating them when they start becoming older and tend to understand how business and how money and the finances work. So that's what I think.
Yeah, excellent. So AIT, I definitely know where I have a good idea where you're at now with it. Where are you looking to go in the next few years, 5 years, or even 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So the first, the first goal is to graduate from this madness, and then after I'm out of this hellhole, I plan on expanding, pretty rapidly. Since we've been, the truth of the matter is we're 4 years behind, right? Our goal, right? Because if you really think about it, I'm, in college for 4 years, right? So
Yeah,
if I started this company, when I was not in college, we'd be at a whole different place right now, right? So I kind of look at it as 4 years behind, and that's actually a good thing because it keeps me on my feet, right? I think, oh my God, we're behind. How are we gonna do this? How are we gonna do this? So it's a good thing, right? So what we're gonna do, after I graduate, is we're gonna do two things, right? So currently we're in the staffing business, right, where we're staffing different types of resources, right? We're
yep,
gonna continue to expand that business by hiring as many recruiters as we can, right? That's going to be this. That's going to be the way of scaling, right? So, for example, every recruiter is going to be required to bring in X amount of dollars of business every year, right, or every quarter. And if they're not doing that, they have to get out, right, because they're wasting time, right? So that's going to be the first step, right? And then the
yep,
goal is to hire as many recruiters as fast as possible. So of course, we're growing and we're scaling the business. And the second side of the business, which most people would not expect, but is going to be to open up retail side of the business as well. So the retail side of the business is going to offer smartphone and wearable technology and computer repair services, right? So all different types of customers are going to be able to go into their local repair store, and they're going to be able to, get our services, so they can, get their technology repaired, their, or, buy, different types of accessories, or so on and so forth, right? And the real goal and the real vision, right, is to kind of have a Starbucks version of that, just not as, just not as, I guess, or as many of them, right? So, for
Right.
example, there's a Starbucks, right, on every corner of New York City, right? Our goal is not to have, a AIT location on every corner of New York City. Our
Right.
goal is to have, as many as locations as Starbucks do, but just as more spread out, so that way the demand is staying high, right? So that's kind of what we're aiming to do. We're looking to become, the next Starbucks, I guess, is the right way to put it, of AIT, pretty much. So, have as many locations as possible, not only throughout the United States, but also expand to other countries as well, as an international company. And that goes same for our staffing side as well. So just to kind of give you a brief background about where we are today. Currently, we work with, startups that are well funded. We work with mid-sized companies, and we also work with large Fortune 500 companies as well. And that's kind of, something I really, really do enjoy, because there it's a really, it's really different, right, when you work with a startup or when you work with a Fortune 500 company, right? So it's definitely a great experience, and it's definitely been a very interesting ride so far.
Yeah, I could see. It's funny how like you think a bigger company might be more powerful, but a lot of times they're less agile
Absolutely.
than a smaller business.
Definitely, yep. And it's actually also really interesting because, not with working with larger clients, not only, is there more money to be made, but, also the thing is that, you spend less time, right? And it's actually really surprising because most people think when you work with large companies, you know, you spend more time, right? But the thing is that, these large companies know exactly what they want, and they're very clear and they're very precise in what they want, right?
Yeah.
Versus when you work with smaller clients, it's a whole different ball game. So it's definitely, very, interesting. But, it's really great because, we get to work with a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of, CEOs that are still starting out, right? And that are, well funded, but, but still not, a billion-dollar company yet. So it's definitely very interesting to see that as well. And it definitely keeps us, going forward as well, to try to see, the different strategies and the different things that they're doing. And it's definitely very, very, fulfilling.
Yeah. What are some of the brands that you admire or love?
A brand on which side? The startup side, or like the large Fortune 500 side?
Um, Ones that are commonplace in
Yeah, I think
popular
I'm
brands.
sure you've heard of the Fitbit.
No, what is
Oh,
it?
you haven't? Fitbit, FIT
Oh,
bit.
Fitbit. Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
So, I think that they're definitely doing some, really, really cool things. So, I think wearable technology is, one of the, definitely is the way of the future. I think that, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to come out over the next, 3 to 4 years. And I think that that's why, our retail side of the business is also going to do well, right? Because if you think about it, right? I
Yeah,
mean, not Fitbit necessarily, but, other wearable technologies, they're going to break, right? Every technology breaks at some point in their lifespan, right? So I think that, having a center where, you can go into, and whether it's the newest, wearable technology, or if it's, if it's still your desktop, in your parents' house, you can still take that technology into our, locations, and you can have that, repaired. So I think that that's what definitely the way of the future is. So that's kind of why I'm excited about our retail strategy, in addition to our staffing side of the business.
yeah. I think once the Apple Watch gets going, I think that has the potential to take
Oh,
off because
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
think
definitely.
Apple will do it right.
Yep, absolutely, yeah, definitely. And that's definitely that's where we're headed. And we definitely, it's really important that, we definitely move as fast as possible as a technology company, and it's definitely important to us that, we're opening as many locations as fast as possible, and we're, staffing as many, resources, right, as fast as possible, just like any business would have a goal. But
Yeah,
for us, it's really important that, we bring a lot of value, to our customers, whether it's on the retail side or whether it's on the staffing side. It's just, I think that especially in the business that, I'm in, I think it's really like, there's no proprietary way of differentiating yourself. So I think it's really the company that brings the most value, right? Outside of, the pitching side, tends to win, in the end. So that's kind of what we look at and focusing on, by working with different types of companies.
sure. So I think I got an answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway because it maybe it'll be a little bit different.
Mhm.
What motivates you to do what you do, Amit?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think it's, a couple of things, right? So when I was really young, people really saw me as, somebody who's, going to graduate and maybe get, a okay job, right? Not even forget about, getting a job at like, a large company, right? Or even going to college, right? Forget about that. That was the whole crazy picture. So I think that the want and desire to prove people wrong, I think that's been a huge factor. And I think just the simple reason of wanting to succeed in life, and wanting to make something out of myself, and wanting to be somebody who has contributed to significantly to the technology community. I think I mean technology has just been a passion, as explained, with the things I did, from a younger age. But I think I mean, I'm just a very competitive person when it comes to business. So I think that of wanting to succeed, and failure is not an option. Just that simple thing, it just really drives me, and gets me up in the morning.
Yeah, and technology is not going anywhere.
Absolutely, yeah,
It's just
that definitely
it.
is not. So
um,
yeah, I mean, I think that's just, for that simple reason. I mean, and just wanting, I mean, and I know what our revenue has been this year, and wanting to increase that. I mean, this year we've been very fortunate to be able to increase our revenue by 4 times, and next year is looking at another whole 5x increase. So it's definitely very,
nice.
very, very exciting to be in a fast-paced business that's definitely helping a lot of companies. So that kind of thing is what really drives me, and the want and desire to succeed is, I guess, in a sentence.
Have you heard of his name's Dane Maxwell. He has a company called The Foundation where he basically helps people build a software company by kind of outsourcing to companies like you, but they have the idea and they're like he does what I think you do. Have you heard of this at all? It's called The Foundation.
I actually haven't heard of him.
Yeah,
I haven't
so
actually.
he started by kind of going to I think he had a uncle or his dad was in real estate and he went to a real estate meeting and they were having problems recruiting real estate agents and he said, "Well, how much does it cost you or how much, what do you gain a year for, getting a real estate agent?" And they said, "Well, we about $10,000 per agent." And he said, "Well, what if I could build a software program that would get you, X number of people? Would you pay this much per month to, do that?" And he basically pre-sold the software, so the money was half up front, and then built the software and then sold it on a monthly subscription. Like I think is a great business model because yes, you're going to have maintenance and bugs to work out, but you're also going to have recurring revenue. Which I think is that what you do? You get software as a service. They pay projects or they pay monthly, or is it a mix?
Okay, you actually just faded out a little bit. Yeah, can you repeat that one more time? The Wi-Fi actually just went out, so I wasn't able to hear that.
Okay, I think you just sent me a message too.
Yeah, yeah, it did. Yep. But that was outside of that.
Oh,
Yeah, can you repeat the question one more time?
yeah. I asked if you do software as a service. Where do they pay a upfront package for a software application or program, or do they pay for it and then pay monthly residuals to run the software?
Yeah, so exactly, like so from what it sounds like, what you were referring to before is like so like that's kind of like a platform based, like web application, right? So for those kind of services, like there's usually a subscription, like model, right? But what we do is a little different, actually. I mean, we're a software development firm, right? So we do like resource allocation. So we charge our customers for the development, right, or the time that our resources are spending on their project, right, whatever type of project it is. So we bill at an hourly rate, right? So our hourly rate usually is from like 80 to like $200 an hour, depending on the type of technology or the
Yeah.
type of resource we're allocating, right? So what we do is we just bill at an hourly rate, and before when we sign a contract with any client, right, we usually take like a percentage. So for example, like if it's like a 6 month project, right, then like what we'll do is for the first month, right, we'll take X amount of dollars, right, of whatever the cost will be for the first year to the client, and we'll use that as a deposit, right? And then what we do is we credit that deposit, right, back to the customer towards the bill.
Right.
And that's just a way for us, securing the client, knowing that they're serious about it and committed to the project as we are, right?
Right.
So that's what we do, and then we just bill clients usually, bi-weekly or weekly or monthly, right, depending on the size of the client and what the client is looking to do.
Right.
But after the project is done, usually, we go into other projects with them, as they're interested in building further relationships with us, and as we are. But we don't charge, after the development is done, because our goal is to help them build, great products, or give them the best resources they need. It's not to necessarily make money off their products.
Right. So I remember reading you when you first year of business, you gave some donations. Can you talk about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So in the first year, when we were in business, we actually, I was really reflecting as how I've been able to reach the point I had reached, right? So the amount of money we did in revenue was significantly small, right? But it wasn't really just so much about the money that I was really thankful for. I was really thankful for the amount I had learned that year, right? Just because of of the of being in business, right? There was so much that you learn in the first year. So that's what I was really happy about, and I was just really happy and excited for the next year, because I knew that with that knowledge I had and the ability to strategize and brainstorm and come up with creative ideas, I knew I could do well the following year, and that actually turned out to be well, thank God, right? But I actually made a donation, right, to a doctor at Johns Hopkins, right? So I interviewed a couple of different doctors, and I made a donation to Dr. Nilfer Azad, and I donated about a little over $1,000, right? And that was actually a lot of money then, because our revenue was really small, so it was kind of like half of what we made in that year.
Yeah.
So it was actually really interesting, because I for me, it wasn't just about making the contribution to a doctor that is leading in a colon cancer clinical trial, but for me it was a way of kind of thanking my grandfather, because he was kind of one of the few people who really believed in me when I was really young. And my parents would always yell at me, oh, why aren't you doing your homework? Or like, but my grandfather was really somebody who was like, don't worry, he's going to be all right, and like that kind of thing. So it was actually really interesting, because most people didn't see it that way, and he was kind of one of the people who did view me as somebody who would succeed in life. And I'm just really thankful for that, and I really contribute a lot of my success to that, right? So for me, when I donated the money, it wasn't about, oh my God, I only made $3,000 or whatever it was, right? And I'm only donating a little over $1,000, right? So I wasn't worried about losing money, because I feel that money will follow, right? I'm not worried so much about money, right? And I just really felt it was a great thing that I can do to kind of fuel his memory, and just to make his legacy go on, right? So sure, that $1,000 it won't find a cure for cancer, but I think it's definitely a starting point.
Yeah.
And as my company grows, and once we are reaching like 50, 60, $100 million mark, and even larger than that, I would definitely like to increase the size of my donation, because I do feel that money can definitely make a huge contribution towards finding a cure, and it's really important to me that a cure is found for colon cancer, as that's what my grandfather passed away from.
Well, that's awesome. That's a great story.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And I think the ability to give to causes is something that is definitely more powerful than receiving. I
Absolutely,
think.
yeah. I mean, I think, as businesses, right? Businesses, sure, they're looking to make money, but I mean, the way I look at it, right, is, you kind of have a responsibility, right? Not when you're so much when you're a small company, right? But when you are definitely, growing into like, a $600 million company or $1 billion company, right? You really have that, responsibility to make sure that that the people, right, of your country are, having what they need. And I think it's really important for, philanthropy to take place.
Definitely. Do you have a favorite quote you'd like to share?
A favorite quote. Yeah, sure. I guess it would be, in life, don't be the chess piece, be the one moving the chess piece, right? So meaning that, you don't necessarily want to be the guy who's working. You want to be the guy that's directing a group of people.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
And do you have a favorite book or author?
I actually don't. I actually really don't read that much. I
Nice. I
mean,
like that.
yeah, I really don't. I mean, like, if I was to give you a name, it really would be because you were asking me the question. But I'll be honest, I really don't read that much.
All right. Then I'm going to ask, where can we find you online?
Yeah, of
If someone
course.
wanted to bounce some questions off to you, or maybe they
Sure.
have a business idea they want to run by you.
Yeah, absolutely. So our website, you can definitely visit our website. That's a great place to definitely learn a little bit more about what we do as a company. And also you can reach out to us through the contact form. Our website is www.theaitsolution.com. So it's www.theaitsolution.com.
Excellent. And what about on social media? Do you
Yeah, yeah, you
Twitter
can
or
definitely. Yep, yep. Our Facebook is AIT International, and our Twitter is AIT, I believe.
no biggie? They'll be able
Yeah,
to find it with a
they'll find
search.
us.
Yeah,
Yep.
if they know how to use Google, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it, and I think this is a really you've got a real great story. And if you got a few minutes, I'd like to keep you on the line and just kind of pick your brain on some of the stuff I've got going on.
Oh yeah, of course, it's my pleasure.
So, and well, thanks.
Yes, my pleasure. Thanks so much for the interview.
Again, that was Amit Shah from theaitsolution.com. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'm just kind of in awe with this kid. I enjoyed speaking with him and getting some uh, good advice from a young guy. And we did get a little maybe anti-education, but I kind of want to be clear that education has a purpose, and you get out what you put in. We're not dissing it, but there's definitely a change coming, and the more we're involved, the more we can help create the change that we want it to be. So please like, share, and review this